What's cracking, everybody? XehrFelrose here, bringing you some Pokemon Go Battle League content. And in today's video, we're taking a look at the Holiday Cup Great League Edition here in the Season of Timeless Travels. This is going to be Vigoroth the Cup. And if you weren't already aware, Vigoroth is pretty much the #1 Pokemon now that it's got Rock Slide. And it is by far going to be the most common Pokemon in this whole cup. So have fun seeing Vigoroth on literally every single team. So, as with most metas that we have with Vigoroth, it turns into a counter Vigoroth in whichever way you can, because you know it's going to be on every team. You either run it and or you counter it. So, some other notable things, though, that I want to go over in this meta. Lantern, going to be on just about every other team, as the Lantern Vigoroth core in this meta is nigh unbreakable, with very few exceptions. And Dunsparce is a very strong pick as well. Dubwool is another, like, pseudo Vigoroth. Like, they both do very similar things. Obviously, Dubwool doesn't have that Rock Slide coverage move, but it also is very strong. Skarmory is going to be notable, of course, having that Steel Wing buff. Pachirisu, man, if you got it, smoke him. If you got him, I get him, I guess. Arctibax and Baxcalibur and Altaria are the only 3 dragons in this format that I'm aware of, at least. Let me just verify that with myself. Never mind, there's a couple more. Okay. The Arctibax line, the Altaria, and Dragonite. Those are really going to be the only viable dragon types in this format to be able to break this Lantern and Talonflame core that you see here on my screen. And if you weren't kind of already putting the pieces together, this first team here is basically going to be that BBML, that basic meta line that you're going to see quite a lot, or at least in some variants, right? This team is probably one of the strongest in the format. It is also pretty RPS, though, with a Lantern Talonflame, but if you can find things that can break that, you're going to be in a good place. I also think, quite honestly, that, where was it? Cradily could have a lot of play as well as a thing that breaks that core. And I also think Ferrothorn is also going to be a very viable grass type in the current format. So let's take a look at the team, right? So Lantern, Talonflame, Vigoroth. Woohoo, very nice. B for coverage, as most things are in these limited metas. Lantern with Water Gun is the premier thing that beats so many things that doesn't really make sense, because it just Water Gun plus bulk. That's really what it comes down to, folks. And, I mean, it's Lantern, right? Like, it's either hard win, hard loss, or it's very neutral into things that are like, you know, the Dubwool and the Arctibax can beat it, and that's what I like about it. It beats that Lantern Talonflame core just by being Dragon type. Really, this team gets, you know, picked apart by Altaria. Diggersby, I want to talk about Diggersby. It's going to be listed as a win with Vigoroth. In those sims, it lands a Hyper Beam. Is that ever going to happen realistically? No, probably not. But Dragonite and Altaria being very strong things, so I would honestly go as far as to say that if you want to be able to beat this team or variants of it, this Dragonite, Altaria are going to be 2 Pokemon that you want to focus in on a lot. Because aside from that, this team, especially Vigoroth, being on the safe swap, your opponent can do literally whatever they want. They can just be like, oh, I'm going to win switch, I'm going to set up farms. So unless you have a distinct hard answer to Vigoroth somewhere, it's going to be something that you're gonna struggle with it, and you need to be prepared for it. Unfortunately, this has, you know, kind of become a norm for some of these limited metas that, you know, Pokemon gets so hyped up because it's #1 in the format. Everybody either takes advantage of it or everybody counters it as hard as they can. But the problem is, you can't really hard counter Vigoroth. It's got Rock Slide for those dragons that I mentioned. It's got Body Slam, Spam, and counter for just about everything else. So, I mean, good luck, honestly, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at another team that isn't Vigoroth-centric and see if we get any better results. So this team here, and as my... it's always different, dude. This thing on every slide seems to change. We've got Altaria here as our thing that beats the Vigoroth, right? The whole point of this team is going to use Dubwool to lure out the Vigoroth, and then use Altaria to finish it off, and then we hope that Dunsparce can sweep. I am a very big fan of Dunsparce in this meta. As you noticed, it's one of those things that can beat the Lantern Talonflame core, while also having very consistent damage with rock ground coverage into just about everything else. The only things that it really struggles with are the normal types with fighting moves like Vigoroth and Dubwool, and really not much else. It has play into just about everything else that doesn't hit it with a lot of fast move pressure. So I like this Pokemon a lot. we'll take a look. It's got a B for coverage. So again, and I would like to also say, because I know that I'm going to get comments, as they always do, you know, hey, what can you sub in for this? What can you sub in for that? I want to just say right here, blanket statement, right? Like, you could swap out Double for Vigoroth. You could swap out any of the normals for any other normal type that does similar things. You can swap out Altaria for Dragonite. You can swap out Vigoroth for Double. You could swap out Talonflame for Charizard. You could swap out Credilli for Ferrothorn. All of these teams are made with some semblance of uniqueness in mind, but you can definitely just sub things out. If you don't have a Dunsparce, throw Vigoroth on this team. If you don't have Altaria, use Dragonite. You know, just, you don't have Double, use Vigoroth, right? Kind of like stuff like that. Just kind of, it's a little common sense, but also just, you know, you don't have to think too hard about it, right? It's just simple substitutions for things you don't have or things maybe you'd prefer to use. Maybe you don't want to use Altaria, you'd rather use Dragonite. That works the same. So, you'll notice that a lot of the teams that I pick here have multiple things that beat Vigoroth, and here's the reason why Double beats Vigoroth, okay? That double kick allows it to get to Body Slam in 9 turns as opposed to Vigoroth getting to it in 10, which means that if you safe swap a Double, it outpaces Vigoroth as long as you're doing the correct move timing. So, from the standpoint of using this team as a way to lure out Vigoroth, unless the opponent knows and is very well aware of the Double matchup, they probably will swap in the Vigoroth just to keep it off of the Altaria. Could be a very good trap, useful little devil that little ram is. Things that you need to be aware of with this team and ways you could go around it, right? Skarmory and, I mean, I don't even know. I wouldn't even put Whimsicott on the list of things that are like going to be a problem, right? Like Skarmory seems like the only thing here that is really going to be a pain. And even then, like Dunsparce and Double have some very, very neutral matchups into it, especially if you decide to opt for Wild Charge Double, which I think is definitely a viable strategy. A lot of the other things on this list are not things you're going to see. If you see somebody running Chansey, I hope you just beat them into the ground because they deserve it, and that's all there is to it. So let's take a look at our next team here as we get a little bit further into the cup. So what I've got here is the Lantern Bait team, right? So, or not necessarily the Lantern Bait team, the Vigoroth Bait team. It's another Vigoroth Bait team. We're using Credilli to bait out the Vigoroth. Now, the thing about Credilli is due to its rock subtyping, it resists Body Slam. So, while it's still getting hit with counter damage in much the same way that Ferrothorn would, you could honestly use either or depending on your preference or what the opponent's using on the lead. If you don't see a Lantern in the lead, it's probably in the back. So the opponent may swap it in, or they may swap something else in. It depends on how they line up against Charizard. But this is, again, one of those teams where you're looking to hopefully make the matchup close. And I'm going to resize this because it's very small. And we're trying to just use the grass typings to take advantage of the fact that Lantern's over. You could use something other than Charizard. If you wanted Altaria, works very well with this team, I think. Something else, like if you wanted a triple Lantern team, that would be certainly not a bad place to go with it. But let's take a look at some of the other matchups in this meta. Another B for coverage. The only two, technically, Vigoroth does beat Ferrothorn and Credilli just because the counter damage does vastly outproportion their charge move damage. And the reason why I haven't talked about Aurorus yet is because I don't think anyone's really going to bring it in a meta that has Vigoroth and Lantern as the top 2 premier Pokemon. I don't see a world in which Aurorus makes a splash like it used to. I could be very wrong about that. I think that Aurorus definitely has a ton of play in this meta, as long as it stays off of some of those harder hitting or harder matchups for it. But that being said, this team has a lot of play. All of you know very well that Charizard is a dominant force in any meta that it's allowed to be in, and you could certainly substitute it out for. So, you know, Talonflame, for example, would be a very, very suitable substitution for it. Really just depends on your preference and coverages. Either way, you're going to be doing fine with that sort of lineup. The only things that really beat this team are going to be Magnezone, Alolan Sandslash, Pidgeot, and Golbat are the things that are listed in the Sims. You know, Charizard's able to beat Vigoroth, which is huge. And imagine it's probably going to be bait dependent with a Dragon Claw versus Blast Burn. But because Vigoroth has Rock Slide, you have to proceed with caution with flyers, especially of the fire and flying variety, because a Rock Slide would essentially one-shot a Charizard. So you can use whatever flyer you so desire. Charizard was just one that I was trying to highlight because it was more unique, and I haven't put it on one of the teams yet. But again, like all of these teams, you can substitute the grass types for other grass types. You can substitute the Charizard for the Talonflame or Dragonite or whatever it is you want to use. And for the most part, you have an answer to everything else in the meta with this team. So I think that it's going to be a very decent team, especially when it comes to the Vigoroth, because you're still able to put out pressure with the Credilli and the Ferrothorn, especially if you get a good energy lead. So let's take a look at another team here. This one's a little bit more on the rock, paper, scissors side. If you know, the Skarmory Mudboy core is very strong, and it continues into even this meta. However, one thing to be afraid of here is the fact that most lanterns will be running Water Gun. Now, if you hit a Water Gun lantern, Stunfisk is a little bit less effective because it's taking that super effective Water Gun damage. But if the opponent does run Spark, Stunfisk is in charge. It's going to be able to handle that lantern, and so hopefully the opponent's not rocking a damn Talonflame on the other side of that team to deal with the Skarmory. But if the meta ends up turning into a bit more of a Vigoroth-centric meta, this team, well, of course it'll be a Vigoroth-centric meta, but if you don't see as many Talonflame and Lantern cores, this whole team beats Vigoroth in, even shields. But Sableye as the safe swap here is really just a pivot, right? You could put Vigoroth in there. You could put Dunsparce. You could put Double. You could put really any safe pivot that'll help you get switch advantage in the event that you need it. But the one thing that I really do like about Unova Stunfisk is that it has a ton of play into that Talonflame and Lantern core. If you end up seeing a person who's running Lantern, you could certainly play out the lead matchup such that you get it into range of a Brave Bird maybe from Skarmory, and then swap into your Sableye and save your Ufisk for later. There's a few different ways you could play that out. You could also replace the Ufisk with Dunsparce. You could certainly do different things here, but I wanted to highlight Ufisk because it does look like it has a lot of play in this meta. I think that there's a good chance that it makes some waves, especially into the cores that we're expecting to see, or at least I'm expecting to see, right off the gate. And Alolan Sandshrew is the only thing in this meta that can 1v3, or not 1v1 this entire team and win, right? It's obviously not going to beat the entire team, but it certainly has a good matchup into most of these things, given that it's got the Ice Steel typing. You could almost say the same for Alolan Sandslash. However, I believe that the Unovan Stunfisk maybe gets the win. I'm not sure. I'd have to take a little bit of a deeper look here. Oh, never mind. Everything technically beats Alolan Sandslash. I think there might be because of the bulk difference, right? You've got the Mud Bombs from Ufisk. You've got the Steel Wings that add up very quickly from the Skarmory, and you've also got the Sableye just being Sableye. So that'll explain that then. Okay. I was curious because I didn't see on the list. It was kind of strange to me. But we got very good matchups here. If you see a bunch of Lickitung, well, I guess play Dunsparce instead. That's definitely what I would opt to look at there. So we'll take a look at one last team here before we close it out. But it's a good one, I promise. Yep, that is an orange Alolan Golem, and this is a bit on the spicier side. But what we've done here is Chestnut, right? Chestnut looks like it could be pretty decent. It's got fighting and grass coverage, so it has a spot in the meta when it comes to dealing with the Lantern Vigoroth core. Lantern itself and Graveler are both two of the hardest anti-flyers in this meta, which is certainly what Chestnut really has a problem with. They also both quite soundly beat fire types as well. So things like Skeleturge and Charizard, Talonflame, all of the, most of the things here that Chestnut really has a problem with. Also ice types as well. Graveler and Lantern typically have very strong matchups in the ice types. So most of the things here that Chestnut has problems with, Lantern and Graveler are able to provide coverage. Now, I know that the letter coverages aren't exactly ideal, but we see two of these things that beat Vigoroth. Lantern gets completely destroyed, as does Dunsparce because of that fighting coverage on the superpower. You know, there's coverage against all of the top meta here, and I think that that's really what's important. Now, all right, you see a lot of core breakers, but let's break it down. Lurantis, Venusaur, Trevenant, Superior, Whimsicott. Only 5, and they're all grass types. So, yes, if grass, anti-grass grass, right? Like if Superior, Trevenant, Venusaur, I would say Lurantis, but I don't really think Lurantis is going to catch on. I think it's just because it has that superpower coverage that it's being hyped up a little bit more here in The Sims, but I certainly feel like all 4 of them have some play. Whimsicott having some play into the Vigoroth because it has that fairy typing allowed to resist those counters. Those are really the only 5. So if you start seeing a lot of those, then maybe pivot away from this team. But if you're seeing a lot more of the things that this team can handle that aren't those 5 grass types, because everything after that is like, I'm not looking at that and considering this an issue, right? So like Roserade, Grovyle, Oranguru. Oranguru could be useful, but I don't see it, at least not at first. Vileplume, Tangela, like no one's running those except for maybe those crazy, those crazy Great League enthusiasts that have way too much dust and not enough things to build. But the fact that this team has so little meta-popular core breakers to it is a good sign. And I think that this could be a very strong team. So let me know in the comments what you plan to run here in the Holiday Cup here coming up at this in this rotation. Again, that rotates in today at Niantic time. And it lasts us for a week until we get all 3 leagues open. So looking forward to this cup a bit here. Let me know what you plan on running, what some of your favorite picks are. Let me resize this as I forgot to do it already anyway because I am a champion. And I will catch you all in the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Also, sub to the Patreon and get some coaching on Metafy because I forgot to say it. There you go. Bye.